married for 20 years, she has become invisible to her husband. From tears of grievance to biting her tongue, to simply getting used to it, her deep-seated hopes have been worn down by indifference. But an unexpected trip through France helps her slowly rediscover herself. If you have ever felt the sting of being ignored, or lost your way amidst the daily grind, maybe you need an escape like this, somewhere new and unfamiliar, to find the self that life has buried. And as a full-time housewife, while her husband is a successful film producer, for the sake of her family, she gave up the career she had built for years. She thought her devotion would secure a warm life together, but in the end, all she got was his daily neglect and indifference. This time, she joined her husband at the Cannes Film Festival, hoping to enjoy a getaway just for the two of them, but Michael's phone seems glued to his hand. It's one call after another, all about business in Budapest. It's as if this vacation, ending before it began, is just a trivial annoyance to him, and looks at him, her eyes filled with resignation. But she is long used to coming second. Her needs, her feelings seem to matter so little. When checking out, Michael frowns at the bill. Despite being well off, he makes a fuss over a 12-euro bottle of mineral water. Then he turns to complain to Anne that she ordered too much for breakfast, and playfully pushes back, "Honey," but what hurts even more is, after Michael finishes a work call, he heads downstairs without looking back, leaving Anne alone to drag her heavy suitcase down step by step. The sound of the wheels in the hallway echoes the silent sighs in her heart. Just as she reaches the hotel entrance, she runs into her husband's colleague, Jacques. As a native Frenchman, Jacques was incredibly hospitable. He insisted on playing the perfect host, and offered to drive them to the airport in his own car. On the way, Anne's ear pain grew worse. Michael spent the whole ride talking business with Jacques, completely oblivious to his wife's discomfort. Ironically, it was Jacques, whom they had barely met, who keenly noticed something was wrong. He found an excuse to pull over, and soon returned with a large bag of items: sausages made by a local artisan, fresh fruit, and a bottle of ear drops. Jacques placed the drops right into Anne's hand. Looking at the bottle in her palm, a warm feeling quietly washed over her, but Michael's reaction instantly cooled the moment. He deliberately steered the conversation back to work, as if Jacques' concern for Anne was something that needed to be ignored. Once they arrived at the airport, the staff also noticed and wasn't well. They gave her a serious warning that cabin pressure could aggravate her ear pain, and advised against her boarding the plane. After a moment's thought, Anne decided to cancel her flight. She planned to take the train to Paris alone, and meet her husband after he finished his business. Jacques immediately mentioned he was driving to Paris for a meeting, and that Anne could catch a ride if she didn't mind. Trusting his business partner, her husband didn't offer any extra words of care, simply entrusting his wife to Jacques. But at the time, Anne had no idea that a trip supposed to take 7 hours would, through Jacques' deliberate planning, be dragged out to nearly 50 hours before reaching the destination. As Anne and Jacques set off on their journey, he said softly to her, "Let's pretend we don't know where we're going, and don't know who we are." Those words acted like a key, instantly unlocking Anne's tightly wound nerves. She began to shed the identity of Michael's wife, and started to simply be herself again, the woman who used to love photography, who was passionate about food, a woman curious about the world. Jacques skipped the highway, opting to drive slowly along the French country roads instead, with Mozart playing in the car. Along the way, Jacques took her to a hidden little restaurant. He ordered local wine and some specialty dishes. As they chatted, the atmosphere grew relaxed. Anne picked up her camera and snapped away at the food on the table. She hadn't felt this spontaneous in ages. Back home, her camera always stayed in a drawer. Michael never asked what she'd taken, let alone looked at her photos. But just as Anne was lost in the joy of photography, Jacques suddenly spoke up, claiming there was a problem with his card, and asking to borrow Anne. After all his hospitality, Anne couldn't really say no, so she handed it over. Afterward, Jacques took her to see the lavender field. It was a sight Anne had never seen before. The fields of purple shimmering in the sunlight looked like a gentle ocean. As a breeze blew past, the scent of flowers filled the car. Next, Jacques took her to the ruins of an ancient castle, a masterpiece of stone masonry from 2,000 years ago, and took out her camera and kept snapping photos, wanting to capture every bit of the beauty, not to show anyone else, but just for herself. At Jacques' suggestion, she tried 4 flavors of ice cream at once. As the flavors melted on her tongue, it felt like the authentic taste of life she hadn't experienced in so long. Jacques even plucked a dandelion, popped it into his mouth, and joked that with some olive oil and anchovies, it would make a delicious salad. Seeing how carefree he was, Anne couldn't help but laugh. It had been a long time since she felt this relaxed. No chores to worry about, no husband to wait on, just the beautiful scenery, good food, and someone willing to waste time with her. The two continued on their way. Along the way, Anne stopped to pick up some supplies. When she looked back, she saw that Jacques was already mingling with the local children, and quietly watched him, unable to help but admire his carefree nature. His cheerful, open personality was incredibly infectious. It wasn't until night fell that they finally arrived at their hotel. When the receptionist handed over just one key, and cast a puzzled look at Jacques. It turned out Jacques had already made other arrangements, and breathed a sigh of relief. Just then, her husband called. Hearing that Anne hadn't driven through the night, but had checked into a hotel with Jacques instead, his tone instantly darkened. He was clearly displeased. From start to finish, Michael didn't ask if she was tired from the journey, but instead beat around the bush, reminding her to keep her distance from Jacques. By the end of the call, he was like a needy child again, nagging Anne about where his medicine kit was, and felt utterly drained. She finally realized that disappointment never comes all at once. It accumulates bit by bit. After hanging up, she looked in the mirror and made up her mind. She was going to dress up, cast these annoyances aside for a while, and give herself a well-deserved break. When dinner time came, Anne made a stunning entrance in a bright red dress. Even though she was nearing 50, her unique charm remained captivating. A stranger, drawn to her allure, stepped forward to strike up a conversation. Jacques immediately stepped in, smoothly defusing the man's attempt. While ordering, and looked troubled by the all-French menu, Jacques picked up on it instantly, and took the initiative to select the perfect dishes and pairing. With Jacques by her side, and didn't have to worry about a single detail. They started chatting about Anne's daughter, who had just started college. Looking at the photos of her daughter on her camera, Anne's thoughts drifted back in time. She clearly remembered when her daughter was little. She loved sneaking into Anne's high heels and wobbling around the house. As she spoke, her eyes began to mist up. She couldn't help but sigh at how fast time had flown. When she was younger, for the sake of her family, she decisively closed the clothing store she'd run for years, and poured all her energy into the home. Now that her husband's career was booming, and her daughter was all grown up, no longer needing her constant care, the sudden emptiness of her days left her feeling at a loss. She suddenly felt as if she had lost her sense of worth. Jacques gently comforted her. His words of admiration struck a chord in Anne's heart. He didn't just have unique taste in food and art, he also knew how to appreciate a mature woman like Anne, and the unique charm she possessed. Then, Jacques tried to reassure Anne, saying her husband was a generous and kind man. He once sympathized with a showgirl, and gave her his own gold watch. As soon as the words left his mouth, Anne's expression changed instantly. Her good mood vanished in a flash, and the dinner ended on a sour note. Early the next morning, a waiter knocked on Anne's door. He delivered an assortment of refreshments Jacques had ordered for her, along with a sincere letter of apology. When she finished reading the letter, her frustration from the night before vanished, and decided to break her routine, and indulged in a cup of extra sweet hot chocolate. To avoid any misunderstanding with her husband, she went through yesterday's photos and deleted them one by one, but in the end, she couldn't help but keep one. She never harbored any unrealistic fantasies about Jacques, but she knew that outside of her dull marriage, to have a space like this, someone to keep her company and talk to, a chance to catch her breath, and to feel like a cherished woman again, perhaps it wasn't such a bad thing. However, Jacques' actions soon shattered the perfect image he had built in Anne's mind, and couldn't help but sigh, surprised that such a seemingly gentlemanly man could be so unreliable. On the way to their next destination, Jacques took Anne to the center of a 2,000-year-old Roman amphitheater. The iconic structure was magnificent, looking a bit like a pyramid, and was now a habitat for birds, and was captivated by the ancient architecture. She kept snapping photos with her camera, wanting to preserve this beautiful moment forever. After leaving the Roman arena, they stopped at a gas station. Jacques filled the tank, while Anne went to the market to buy food. When Anne came out of the store, she found Jacques and the car had vanished. She felt a sudden panic, and could only return to her seat inside to wait. Before long, Jacques finally drove back, with a row of roses conspicuously on the back seat. It turned out he remembered she liked roses, and had detoured to a friend's garden to pick them, and was both surprised and delighted. She hadn't expected a casual mention of her preferences to be taken so to heart. Driving amidst the floral fragrance, they began to imagine what surprises awaited at the next stop, but they didn't get far before the car broke down halfway. Jacques checked everything over, but couldn't find the problem. Their lovely plans were instantly disrupted. Jacques suggested they just have a picnic nearby, since they were stuck anyway. He picked some wild watercress to go with their cheese and bread. The simple combination had a unique flavor. Bathed in the afternoon sun, a warm country breeze blew gently. A subtle romance lingers in the air. Watching Jacques' relaxed demeanor, and feels her own anxiety fading. For a moment, she truly senses a completely different pace of life. But the broken car is still right there waiting. She decides to take a look under the hood, and discovers the fan belt has snapped, and remembers a trick she saw online. She takes off her pantyhose, ties them together for strength, and uses them as a makeshift belt. Jacques installs it, skeptical but willing to try. To his surprise, the engine actually starts. Jacques laughs, praising her ingenuity, but he knows it's only a temporary fix, so he drives straight to the nearest repair shop. The mechanic finds a laundry list of other issues that will take a few days to fix. With no other choice, they have to borrow the mechanic's old clunker to continue their journey, but Jacques still isn't in a rush to get there. Once they drive into the city, Quickly, he stops right in front of a museum. He finds a tour guide for Anne, then excuses himself for important business, walking off with the curator. When Anne finishes her tour, she spots Jacques flirting with a woman. It suddenly dawns on her. Jacques' charm and attentiveness aren't because she's special, it's just the French way of life, simply second nature to him. Later, Marie takes them to the local market, famous for its incredible ham and cheese. She then brings them to a restaurant to sample the local specialties. The table is filled with dazzling dishes, a feast that lifts the spirits just by the sight of it. But the authentic escargots are something Anne just can't stomach. She quietly wraps a snail in her napkin and tosses it away. Unexpectedly, a hungry kid picks it up and quickly changes the subject. Noticing Anne's interest in the fabrics, Marie suggests a visit to the textile museum and initially wanted to refuse, wanting to get back on the road. So she whispered to Jacques that this would be their final stop. Inside the textile museum, Anne spotted an 18th century piece. Without reading the description, she never would have believed a man created it. Her time in Lyon gave Anne a true taste of France, its rich culture and unique culinary tradition, and went around snapping photos until the curator confiscated her camera. Jacques rushed over to smooth things over and managed to get the camera back for her. As they departed Lyon, Marie told Anne she was sure she'd never forget this journey with Jacques. Once back in the car, and urged Jacques to drive straight to Paris, insisting on no more detours. But unexpectedly, as they passed a famous church, she, who had just been in such a rush, suddenly changed her mind and asked to stop for a visit. Jacques steered the car toward the church. This was the last place they would visit. It said Richard the Lionheart launched the Third Crusade from here. Mary Magdalene's remains lie beneath the altar. The columns inside are carved with images, each telling a specific story. When Anne saw the statue of the Virgin Mary, she stopped in her track, tears streaming down her face without warning. Seeing her distress, Jacques gently encouraged her to share her pain, and remained silent for a long while, before slowly opening up. After her first child was born, he lived for just over 30 days. Her ex-husband later took his own life in grief. She had never been able to move past it. The locket on her necklace held a photo of that first child she had with her ex-husband. She wore it constantly, simply to remind herself of how fragile life is, and that simply being alive meant enduring such agony. Jacques patiently comforted her. He was like a ray of light, illuminating the dark corners of Anne's heart. She hadn't spoken of this pain to anyone for years. Not even Michael knew. She thought she had moved on, but the sorrow was buried deep inside. Jacques' understanding made her realize for the first time that there was no shame in her pain. She could talk about it openly, and finally find the courage to let it go. Then, Jacques shared a secret of his own. His brother had committed suicide, leaving behind a 2-year-old son. He had always hidden the truth from his nephew, telling him his father died in an accident. Two wounded souls, finding warmth in each other in the morning light, and suddenly realize that everyone carries their own burden. The meaning of life isn't to dwell on the past, but to move forward while carrying its traces. After leaving the church, they stopped at a restaurant for dinner. A single cherry tomato had been presented by the chef with exquisite care. Jacques thought it was a bit over the top. They chatted about the foods they ate as children. Just as the conversation was flowing, Michael called. He rambled on and on about his work, but the moment he found out Anne was still with Jacques, he warned her again to watch out for French men. He hung up before Anne could get a word in, and felt a pang of disappointment. Her husband hadn't changed at all. He never asked how she was doing, always putting his own affairs first. Seeing the look on her face, Jacques couldn't help but say something, and fell silent. It wasn't that she hadn't tried to speak up before, but Michael always brushed it off as nothing. Over time, she just stopped trying. A wedding was taking place at the restaurant. Jacques led Anne to the dance floor. In the dim, romantic light, swaying to the melodious music, Anne can feel Jacques' heartbeat and the flutter in her own. Yet, she still gently pushes Jacques away. After 2 days on the road, the car finally arrives in Paris, bringing their journey to an end. Both seem left wanting more. Jacques helps Anne with her luggage to the elevator. He hopes for a parting kiss, but the elevator doors close abruptly, as if cutting off the feeling just starting to bloom between them, and drags her luggage to her room, and immediately checks her voicemail. It is full of messages from Michael. Her husband couldn't reach her all night, and was clearly frantic, listening to the messages, and feels a sudden sense of irony. She opens the window to look out, assuming Jacques has long since left, but a second later, the doorbell rings. She opens the door to find Jacques standing there with flowers, wearing a gentle expression. Clearly, he isn't ready for a rushed goodbye. Over the last 2 days, he has fallen for Anne's unique charm, and so, he confesses his feelings to her. Although there is a spark between them, Anne remains conscious of her marriage vows. That is a line she will not let him cross. Before parting, Jacques removes the bracelet he has worn for years, and gives it to Anne, asking her to meet him at the hotel restaurant the next afternoon for dinner, but Anne gives no answer. Early the next morning, Anne receives a package from Jacques. Inside is a box of chocolate roses, a note, and the cash she advanced for the trip, and smiles as she reads the card. She casually picks up Jacques' bracelet and ties her hair back with it. She does not go to see Jacques. It wasn't a lack of love, but because he understood the true meaning of the journey. It wasn't about escaping a marriage, but about finding herself. And so, the movie draws to a close. The film Bonjour Anne, on the surface, is an accidental trip through France, but at its core, it is a woman's journey of self-redemption. Anne, who begins as a woman lost in her marriage, always compromising for others, transforms into someone confident, independent, and brave enough to pursue her dreams. Her transformation is deeply moving. This film reminds us that marriage isn't a woman's entire world. No matter the circumstances, a woman must never lose herself. She should hold on to her own hobbies and stick to her dream, for that is where her unique value lies. At the same time, the movie teaches us to learn to make peace with the past. In every person's life, there will be painful memory and regrets that cannot be undone. If we hold on to them too tightly, we only bring ourselves more suffering. Just like Anne, haunted by the loss of her child and her ex-husband's suicide, she had been living in guilt and agony, unable to forgive herself. But when she opened up in the church of Désolé and heard Jacques' words of comfort, she finally realized the past is gone. What matters most is cherishing the present and embracing the future. If you are currently at a low point in life, or if you feel lost in your marriage, you might want to give this movie a watch. I believe you'll find your own answers within it. Remember, no step in life is ever wasted. Every step counts. As long as you don't give up on yourself, you will surely find your own light.